Hello, everyone. We are so happy to meet together every Wednesday, and it is a very exciting day to see the things happening in our world right now. And also, it is a beautiful thing to understand what the Bible interprets, the things we are seeing today. So I want to combine the word of the Lord together into the things that are happening in our world so that we may come into the right decision and discernment unto the meaning and the revelation of the Lord. And tonight, and also I want to give some of the very important things that's really happening in this very land, the United States of America. And I think, we can divide it, the first war and pre-war, but probably we may not be able to go onto the first war, but perhaps until pre-war, so perhaps the First World War, but not the Second World War because it's pretty much big enough. So it's centering around the Federal Reserve System, which means to us the Federal Reserve Board of Directors or Governors, which actually birthing the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements. And underneath of the international settlement, there are two international monetary systems. The first one is the International Monetary Fund. Second one is World Bank. So I know today that before I give my lecture, it's a very important book, the Brian O'Brien's books. And many of you know this book. If you do not know, probably pay attention to this. This is the tyranny of the Federal Reserve. And very careful analysis and descriptions on the beginning and the process and expansion of the Federal Reserve. And if you want to know this one, you can Google it and you can find it out. And also another connection to the Federal Reserves, in a way that the Schiff family and Morgan family and also Wasworks family, there are many families we're coming out of the branches of the Rothschilds. So that's why in detail, this is the second volume book, which is called The House of Rothschild, beginning from 1849 to 1999. So I didn't bring a lot, just two books for you, if you want to take a look. And I want to give one of the scripture today before I begin. This scripture may give you understanding why I give this lecture. Because there are two important questions in our lives. The first one, where does America position when it comes to the prophecy of the prophet Daniel and also the book of Revelation? Number two, where is the position of the European Union when it comes to the prophecy of the gospel? And I think it is clear, about the position of the European Union, otherwise the European continent, in a way the Bible prophesied long ago. But there is no name, the America in the Bible. But there is a name of Europe in the Bible. However, there is no name of America because Europe was considered part of the Roman Empire. Therefore, we are able to looking at the situation, what the Bible described in a way that the Babylonian Empire, Median Persian Empire, and the next one is Hellenistic Empire, and the final one is Roman Empire. The Roman Empire inherited into the Middle Ages of the European continents. Hence, we have the continuity between this time era, the ancient to the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages bring first to the modernization, which means to us industrial revolution, at the same time urbanization. And the other one is enlightenment. Enlightenment means to us the enlightening to the dark world according to the rationality and the reasoning of the philosophy and the human sciences. So in our world today, what we are knowing here today is the one world economy. Actually, one world economy may bring into the existence This is a kind of modeling. And I know this one world economy and the Federal Reserve System, whether we say the Federal Reserve Board of Directors or governors, whatever it is say, this is very critical to us to understand the plain role of the Antichrist government, which is called one world government, which was foretold in the book of Revelation, chapter 6, and book of Daniel. And all of those actually and fulfilling in our own eyes. So it is very exciting to us. And I know that many of you are remembering some of this, we call 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The 4 horsemen is the beginning of the book of Revelation, chapter 6. The white horse and scarlet horse, blue horse, and dark horse coming into the front, and the judgment begins. This is so-called, it's a very important realms of the judgment. When the great seal is unsealed in the book of Revelation, chapter 6. So the first one, as you know, the war. The second one is the famines and disasters. The disasters includes the natural disasters and calamities. In some cases, if you know the Guangzhou, now the Guizhou and Hubei in China, it is like the great flood happened yesterday. The many will remember what happened in China right now. And all of the news media says that this is not a natural disaster. The one voice they say that what they actually created, the mega dam in the very land in Hubei, is the one creating earthquake and the great flood and the greatest rainfall in 100 years' time. So we have to clearly looking at every calamities and earthquakes and the problems and disasters in our world in a way how we human beings created and resulted in different kind of consequences. The many of us remember like when the ocean becomes dark and scarlet and this is natural disaster. No, what we dumped into the oceans contaminated the oceans and polluted. What we use the motor vehicles and the all kind of the power plants are resulted in the air pollution in the air. And what we are using, the GMO, is destroying our immune system, the body system, our cell system, and blood system. And what we are actually using the different kind of categories in the Indian Oceans, and mostly they say that in Indian Oceans, one of the biggest things last in 2019 is in a way that the people actually use a lot of the carbon dioxide. And this resulted in the way the different Indian, the hurricane direction. Usually the hurricane will bring the seasonal rain into Australia, but rather the seasonal rain goes to the Africa. This never happened before. That's why this rainfall and rainstorm in Arabia, like Emirate Kingdom, and Arabian Peninsula, and in some cases like Iran, they had never such a kind of rain before, but they received rain. But not only there, but in Sudan, in Egypt, and Ethiopia, and Djibouti, and Somalia, and Kenya. The desert land received the rain, and they paved the way to have the swamps to grow enough for the locust swamp. And this locust swamp become the multitudes and multitudes as they multiplied in a very short time period. And then what happened? What the Bible prophesied about the coming of the locust swamp. It is closely related to our human reaction. Please remember what the Bible says. It is not suddenly what God said, let it be done. No, everything is resulted in the human mistake and human cause. Another one is actually human cause and effect. If you don't know, mainly what the Bible said, I believe in it, but you never think about the responsibility of humanity. Everything, the prophecies in the Bible, are closely correlated into the human reactions. If you spoil the land never bring the moisture into the air, and there will be no more rain like a Saharan desert. 2,000 years ago, it was not barren, but when the Roman soldiers cut down the trees in Tunis and Carthage and others, the rain never coming down. So that's a human reaction. So if you're looking at the book of Revelation, the many of us remember, we do all kinds of disobeying things what God commanded. Our government, Sustainable Project of the United Nations, the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, the International Monetary Funds, the money holder is controlling the world in the position of the mammon, the gods of money. And they control over the dominion of the governance and the economics, and even more so like industries and others. If you remember all the sphere of the area of the humanity, clearly it tells us from the Bible that we humanity disobey the very nature of the creation of God. We rebelled against the creation of the Lord. And that is a very important thing, that don't get away from the point of the Bible. Brethren, the book of Revelation chapter 6 verse 7 to 8, it says that when the Lamb opened the fourth seal, the first seal, second seal, third seal was opened. When he unsealed the fourth one, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. This is the last one. Its rider was named Death, and the Hades, the gate of hell, the Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by the sword, famine, plague, by the wild beasts of the earth. Can you remember four things altogether? War, natural disaster, pestilence, and death toll. Always closely related in this way. So the COVID-19 series, beginning from the number 1, today is 11th. As I'm looking back to all of the PowerPoint today, I remember one of the consistency in my series is about four things always. The war, conflict, killing, violence, disasters, famine, and all kinds of starvations, and then earthquakes and all those things, and pestilence and plagues, pandemics, epidemics, all kinds of the virus things. And the last one, many people died because of the three things. There are cause and effects when three things first comes: disaster, pestilence, and war and violence come, and they resulted in the death toll in a great amount of numbers. Brethren, if you remember this, the book of Revelation, you can remember also the book of Daniel. Chapter 2, the prophesy about the coming empire, mostly about the Greek Empire and later on the Roman Empire. He saw one of the giant statues in the wilderness. And it's said it's made by gold of the heads, and in the half of the body in the upper part is actually made by silver, and the breast in the middle, iron in the thigh, and iron and clay mixed together in the toe, in the 10th toe. Actually, when he saw, and he actually was also, interpreting this meaning. The first gold is actually exemplify the meaning of the empire of the Babylonian. The second one is actually talking about two empires. The first one is Median, like a right arm and the left arm. The second one is Persian Empire. The last one in the middle, in the waist, is actually Greek. But do you remember when Alexander the Great died, and his four generals divided into the four empires coming from the one empire? So that's actually divided, and the Roman Empire reunified all of those. That's the Roman Empire. And then the Roman Empire actually died out. And then what happened? It's like 10 toe was there, but it's a mixture with clay and iron. But what happened? Suddenly one of the milestones, the stone coming from the earth, striking down to the toes of the giant status. And what happened? It struck it, and then the kingdom of the Messiah came down. This is what the prophet Daniel saw in a vision, the Daniel chapter 2. And we know here Roman Empire is gone. And then there's a time of the Gentile era. The Gentile era is like the Messiah deceased. The Messiah was cut off from Jerusalem. And the Messiah prophesied that if you see the Jerusalem is ruined, and then when you see the abomination of desolation standing up in the holy mount, and know that the time is close to you, the time is drawn near to you. And when you know the time, and he talks about all kinds of things, the birth pang of the violences and wars and pestilence and the natural disasters, and in case of the all kind of calamities happening in your eyes, and it says that no, that's not the tribulation will come. That's the sign for you, like what you see in the sign in the heaven and the wonders on the earth. My time is near to you. And the Lord says what happened? Because until the Antichrist come, be ready and also be awakened, be alarmed, be alert. Whatever the times of the signs and wonders coming near to you and happening and taking place in here and there all around, the words and rumors of the words and violences and all kinds of disasters, and even more so like a pandemic, epidemic happening in your world. I said long ago, the world is natural, but when we understand just 260 years in the past, the man created the world. When we know just long ago, it was naturalistic. But after the Industrial Revolution, all of the disasters correlated into the human invention. Motor vehicles, ship, airplane, and all kinds of power plants, and all kinds of human inventions that created all kinds of the ecological problems in our world. And after what you can remember today, in all of this, you see, when suddenly you see in the holy mountain, abomination of desolation may stand, what you mean? The nation of Israel will be restored. God has given us a time clock. The time clock that may we watch what time are we in. Many of us do not know what time are we. But God gave us timeline. Why? Because he gave all timeline in the fast. Because the Israelites were not able to wandering because they know the time clock. Because in the decree of Darius, in the decree of the Artaxerxes, in the decree of the Persian Empire, when they give you the decree that you will rebuild the city wall of the Jerusalem, and it begins of 77 weeks. And the 7 weeks what started, the 70 weeks and the 62 weeks, and then in the last 1 week remain in between the era of Gentile. We call the age of the church. Between the fall of the Rome into the restoration of Israel. So when you see the restoration of Israel, you know the time is close. So May 14 in 1948, all of a sudden, the nationhood of Israel was recognized by United Nations. But the Bible says that the Zion, you say that the nation will not come at once. But the Bible, the prophet Isaiah says that all of a sudden, my daughter Zion will bring my child. Suddenly, in a way that you do not expect. But when we know this restoration of Israel, is closely related into the New World Order. Like the Prime Minister of the Britain, the Bercow. Like all of the Premier of the British Empire. Like the American government president. Like the United League of Nations, what's so-called the League of Nations. And later on it's resulted in the United Nations. All those, when you see that everywhere there's a financier, There is everywhere Jewish people who masterminded into New World Order. So we coming to time in line, not suddenly or naturally coming. It was planned, it was masterminded, it was schemed, it was well designed. Brethren, after the fall of Roman Empire, the many will remember the 476th Anno Domini, the Odoacer, the Germanic tribe, the chief, actually conquered the Roman Empire at once. But before the Vandals and others actually invaded many times the Roman Empire. But he was finally hit the last strokes of the 1,000 years of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was called the Everlasting Empire. And the city of Rome was called the Everlasting City. But everlasting was not everlasting. What the Bible said, the Rome will be revived someday. Do you remember 10 toes from the great giant of the statue? That 10 toe will be revived. So that's the last part. We are living in this world right now. But that was not birthed at once. In a very long process. It's more than 200 years. It's almost same year. It's 1776. The nationhood of America was birthed the same year. Adam Weishaupt created also Illuminati in connection to the Freemason or the secret society in molding and shaping and organizing and even more so instituting New World Order. They fund, financed, they backed up, and they designed all sort of those to be a New World Order coming from different principalities and kingdoms and the nations. So why do I show you this photo? Roman Empire was not deceived. Why? The mentality, the philosophy, Latin culture, the constitution and law, and architectural design, education, and all of the culture and civilization siphoning into the European civilization into the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages is not at once, but actually they inherited everything what the Roman Empire actually prospered before. So, but the area was expanded. Scandinavia was not a part of that. They were called the Germans. And Germans were called Germania by the siege of Caesar. And also the best land of the Slavs, so-called the Sarmatia. In modern day, the Russia, Ukraine, and then the Balkans. You know, there was the Apostle Paul said the north, utmost part of the north was Albania, what was thinking. But in our days, Albania is a southern Europe. Can you remember the geographical idea of the Apostle Paul at the time? Because, you know, this geographical expansion of the Roman Empire, not only into the territory, but also into the lives of the Europeans and different Germanic means barbaric or barbarian, or very, you know, the uncivilized people around 1,000 years. 1,000 years of this history actually is called the Gentile age or the age of church. And then what happened? If you do remember this one, and in the Middle Ages, the modern day of the nationhood was siphoning into the Frankish Empire, so-called the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire was subdivided by the principalities and different kingdoms and different the municipalities and pre-cities like Frankfurt, and the many cities of the pre-cities, Milan, Venice, all those cities are free cities. And the principalities govern themselves. But the first trial to unify the entire nations and principality in Europe was attempted by Rothschild. They are the first one, connected. They are the first one actually ruled over. So this one is very important for us in the Middle Ages. However, in 1517, when Martin Luther started the Reformation, Luther understand the Antichrist is the Pope of the Catholicism. The Catholic Church is the place of the Antichrist. Not only so, the other reformists, such as John Calvin, Melanchthon, and Zwingli, and all others, also perceived the Roman Pope, in which the place of 7 years in the Vatican actually indicating the coming of the Antichrist. And that's why we are not able to interpret the book of Revelation, because the Antichrist, the Pope, and the Roman Catholic Church is actually the one world government, which actually the Roman Pope is governing all the kingdoms around the world. So in this theology, what kind of mindset the Luthers and the Reformists consider the position of the church in a way that the satanic kingdom may be destroyed? They insist the church we have apostolic power. We are the one should destroy the power of the Antichrist. So they don't care about the war. They don't care about actually the violence. That's why Luther was working with the rulers. And John Calvin became one of the council members in the city of Geneva. And John Knox created the kingdom system of the Scotland when he failed in an English system, and then he migrated to Scotland. He succeeded there. So all of the reformists thinking about the kingdom mind on earth by means of the reinforcements in the army and even more the governmental system. So this system was rapidly changed when Rothschild began to unite the economic power and in controlling of crowns, and in some cases, the bank system. Like they were able to obtain a lot of the shares from the Bank of England. And then the Bank of England fell into the hands of Rothschild, Nathan M. Rothschild, Nathan Mayer Rothschild. And in a way also, the French Frere, actually when the James came into Paris, the same way when he supported, the French revolutions and others, and also the more so the Napoleonic Wars. And also one of the greatest gain they got is actually Waterloo War. And then they had tripled their fortunes when they invested their money in funding there. So in a way that they became the richest man in the country. It's richer than the crown, richer than any government. So in Italy, so in Habsburg, so in Vienna and Habsburg. And also they have 5 branches in Frankfurt, in Vienna, and in Naples in Italy, and Paris in France, and in London in United Kingdom. The 5 branches expanded. Why? There are 5 ways they do, as I told you. Direct descent of 10 men, the 5 sons and 5 daughters. So 10 children own a lot of fortune. They directly governing into the money spectrum. In a way, the investments and also the bankings and transactions in between area. Number 2, intermarriage. They were able to upgrade their status and they become all baron. Because, they attained the nobilities in their 2nd generation and 3rd generation more so. And then number 3, they sire a lot of children into different positions. If they want to have the Windsor, the British crown, they sire children into the British crown, and they became the advisor and king's advisor in the British Empire, East India Company, Suez Canal. If you know, some cases like the revolutions in Italy, and in cases also the so-called Civil War, they supported Southern Army in American soil, so that Abraham Lincoln cannot be winning the war. Because the money, they have more than Abraham Lincoln. And therefore, in that way, they were able to create the all kind of conflict by siring children into some of the clans or royal family, or we call royal loyalty. And then number 4, they also have Jewish clan. Because where they live, this is, the ghetto in Frankfurt back in middle 1700s. And what happened? Like Meyer Amschel, he lived together, Schiff family. He lives together another family. So like the Bierbrook. The Bierbrooks, later on Wasbrook in American pronunciation. So they live together. So they've been living together 100 years for a long time. And so nowadays, if it's JP Morgan, if you know Chase Manhattan, the Bank of England, if you know the Wells Fargo, and then if you remember the all kind of like Exxon, and then all of the oil company and tycoons, and some cases, all of the major companies all over the world actually have these Jewish clans. They are not exceptional. And then fifth part, what is that? Like-minded people who are trained in the secret society. The first one is 2,000 men under the Professor Adam Weishaupt. He trained literally, living together, and he trained them into the principle, how to govern, how to obey. And then one of the things they have, one principle in the mindset of obedience is actually worshiping Lucifer. They are called the Luciferian. It never changed. When it comes to the Club of 300, when it comes the Club of Rome, the TFR, the Council of the Foreign Relations, when it comes, the Tavistock Institutes, what is talk about the Trilateral Commission, when it comes like Bohemian Grove, all the build-up of councils, and if you see all those, one common things they do is actually they are called Luciferian. They worship Lucifer. They never worship the Lord Jesus Christ. But it's like the Rockefeller family. Oh, my grandfather was a Baptist. My grandmother was a faithful Southern Baptist. Don't be deceived by that words. They were secret Luciferian worshiper. It has never changed. So one of the political power in American governance is actually done by the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations. All of like-minded people, because the secret society has long-time training. If you remember, if you are in the member of the Freemasonry, 55 degrees, or the first degree, 33 degrees, think about if you are there in 40 years, you have 40 years training program. So whether you have direct descent, whether you have the clans or intermarriage or siring children, the last one, the brainwashed by the Luciferian theology are controlling the world. This is not a conspiracy. I can tell you 1,000 names. We are learning from history. Every single book talks about this connection. Every single the President of the United States of America connected into that conspiracy, not conspiracy, that connection, whether you agree or disagree. If you disagree, like Abraham Lincoln, you become assassinated. If you disagree with the money making from the FIB, you're assassinated like the John F. Kennedy. If you want to agree, like the mother side, the maternal side was the Jewish, Woodrow Wilson created like-minded the first time the FIB. If you are very good, like a Teddy Franklin, Jewish family, also supporting all of the revolutions and creations of the violences in the world. How much do you know? The things the Rothschild governing all of the world, French territory in the half-land of the African continents, America by the Spanish crowns, and 1/4 by the British Empire in the world. All of the world, no matter who you are, what governments, Rothschild governed the world, Asia, America, and Africa, even North America and Europe. This is a reality. We are able to see it. So this is a part of the British Empire, but a half of the African continent governed by mostly the French and then Belgians and others, the Germans. Later on, German, when they failed and lost to the war in the First World War, and German territory coming into the hands of the French and also the British Empire. That's why Iraq is north, and in modern day we call the middle of the Namibias and the other central lands of the African continent. So many will remember here. The first one is, this is one of the illustration in England. So, this is GDP per capita in England. 1270 in sterling. It's almost close like, 50s something. But in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, GDP grows up. British Empire at the end of the 20th century, 19th century, not the 20th century, British Empire became the top country. If United Kingdom alone, it's not the top. But at the end of the 1800s, British Empire was the top. But in 1899, the total gross, so we call the gross the product, is actually rebel together with the United States. That means United States of America grow so rapidly into the point at the end of the 19th century. So British Empire plummeted after that. So this is another one, beginning from 1,000, 1,500, 1,600, and if you see the 2008 and more so, still we are doing it. The greatest nation in the Middle Ages, actually China. And India was, the first century was the greatest nations. And then if you know the European nations in the time of the colonial empire and expansion's time of the Western powers, actually they had the highest one. So that's the peak in the middle of the 18th century at the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s. United States of America was growing so rapidly beginning from 1820 when the Western frontier opened up the middle land, so-called the Midwest today. So like the Kentucky, Ohio, and all those Kansas and Illinois and others. So in this era, the United States expanded, and later on at the end of the 1800s, the West Coast was actually combined together, including the California and Washington and Oregon. And the last part is the Alaska and the Hawaii. So America, United States of America, is growing so rapidly, and no one else knows. It was the superpower in 200 years, Europe, but the power goes more high than the ever before when America gained the territory into the western coast. So here, if you remember, today, 2020, in the we call GDP concerns all of the individual country around the world, in 24.4% of gross income in the world occupied by the United States. So 1 in 4, that's a quarter. The USA is the only superpower. And then if you combine all of those, the European nations, including Germany, United Kingdom, France, and Spain, and Italy, and then all other countries together, United States of America is little greater than all the European nations combined. So if you combine European nations and America all together, the half amount of the gross product in the world is occupied. And China is now rapidly growing. The China stands also second ranked after United States. And then after China, it's Japan. And then after Japan, as you know, Germany, United Kingdom, France, and Italy, and Spain. And then, if you know, the Korea is now a little greater than Russia, because Russia is no longer powerful because the former Soviet Union subdivided into different nations. Why do I say very importance of the United Nations role play in this era? United States of America plays a lot of things. If you combine from the rank 2 to the rank 9 of the military power of the world, USA is greater than the 9 countries combined in the top 10. No country ever since in equal of the military power that the USA has. And also the many financial powers. And the United Nations is positioned in the New York's Manhattan City. Some of you remember here, this is 2007, and then this is another project for the year 2050. United States and the United of the European nations, EU, and Japan, and then others. But in 2050, the China will surface the power of the United States. That's the China will become the superpower in 2050. But this is a projection, no one knows. But so far now, the United States plays a very key role in the world governance. Daniel 2, chapter 2, verses 41 to 42. Just as you saw, the feet and toe were partly baked clay and partly of iron, and so this will be divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with the clay. As the toes were partly iron, partly clay, so the kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. Daniel predicted the Antichrist governments, one world governments. And Daniel predicted that this kingdom has strength and weakness. Not all strong, it's a mixture. The mixture of the ethnicity, races, culture, economic power, political power, and educational power. So Daniel predicted here the 10 toe with mixture clay and iron, forming the world governments under power of the Antichrist, consisting of the 10 nations, 10 empires. So our critical interpretation here we have is the way how we interpret the 10 nations. Because the biblical terminology 10 means not exactly 10, sometimes all. So that's number one interpretation, how we are able to see all nations around the world will be combined and unified. That's number one. Number two, there will be literally 10 nations will be combined so that other weaker kingdom will be actually underneath of this power. For instance, North America, United States of America will be playing the great role, and Canada and Mexico will be just, subordinating to the power. And then the Caribbean, Central America, and Latin America, South America will belong to the power of the leadership of North America. That's the system we think about. So the 10 nations, probably in the world, there will be 10 blocks, or otherwise 10 countries or empires will be actually taking action against the kingdom of Israel. And this is what the prophet Daniel mentioned and how we interpret. So now, the coming of the superpower by the United States is bringing our attention to the biblical interpretation on the things happening around by projecting and implementing and executing UN agenda, like United Nations Agenda 2030, or otherwise 201, or United Nations UN Agenda 21. So that's why in the previous lecture I talked about. And also GMO, chemtrail, and in case of the all kind of human organic society, the stem cloning, and in case of the abortions and all other things, the human inventions in our society, and also even more so, the virus inventions in the lab, because like Wuhan virus lab, they created. This is whole world round is understanding what they really did it long ago. So in this way, the many of you remembering, now these all the COVID-19 things around the globe, around the world, around the national authorities and the regional authorities, what they are doing is actually telling the story of the Bible in our eyes. If you don't interpret that, you're blinded. If you don't understand that, you need to read the Bible. If you do not comprehend that, you have to read the Bible and take that biblical interpretation into today's governance. The timeline of the end time, that many of you remember that when the 70 Anno Domini, when the General Titus was leading invasion of the city of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem fell under the Roman Empire. Again, the General Titus, later on he became the also emperor after his father, Vespasius. So, in this way, what happened? The Bible clearly said, this is what Jesus said. Jerusalem, the daughter of Zion, do not cry for me, but for your children. Because if you would know what things are going to happen in the city of Jerusalem, you may cry. Because he knows the fall of Jerusalem. But what do you mean the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD? That means to us the beginning of the age of Gentile, the beginning of the church, the beginning of the all kind of nation we call Goyim, not Israel. The Goyim begins, and then at the end of the Goyim era, the nationhood, and what happened? Israel will start the third temple, and then the Antichrist will govern in the name of peace, in the name of security and safety, in the name of prosperity, in the name of new world order. In this 10 week, today is the 11th week, little by little, we understand why we have this long series. But I believe if you participated in many weeks, now you come into more so the incomprehension of this plan. Why? We are living in present church age, Olam Hazeh. But we are waiting for the coming of the Lord right now. But the 7-year tribulation remain yet to be fulfilled. Because 69 weeks fulfilled, a week remain. That's a 7-year tribulation. So this 7-year tribulation has two periods, the former and the latter. The former has light tribulation, and the latter part is the heaviest and never happened from the creation, which is called the unprecedented. Therefore, in the middle of the 7-year tribulation, the Lord says that the Holy Mount, you see one of the time clock. What's that? The Antichrist will break the peace treaty, and then he will destroy the temple, and then he will kill the Israelites. So we are seeing this one. The Jerusalem Temple Mount Institute ready to prepare the third temple. The world government is supporting, especially the United States of America, supporting so strongly. U.S. Embassy reposition, not in any other cities. Tel Aviv or Haifa, no. They removed and relocate the embassy in Jerusalem first time. Why? CFR supported any Republican or Democrat. Sometimes some of American people, are you Democratic? Are you Republican? And I'm saying that I'm not in any party. Why? Two parties both support New World Order. No difference. No difference right wing, left wing. No difference conservative and liberal. In the name of the liberal, they do all ungodly things. In the name of the conservative, they supported the Freemasons and Illuminatis and all kinds of these satanic schemes. So no difference in the party. Don't believe your party doctrine. Believe in the Bible. So 7-year tribulation coming soon. But there is the so-called the precursor of the 7 years. What is the precursor of that? We call signs and wonders, the birth pain. Because the signs, the wonders, all of the gestures will be laid first, so that we may know the time draw near. And then what happens when we are awakened, we'll be ready to be sanctified. We'll be ready to win many souls around the world. We know our time is not for us to win many unbelieving souls for Christ's sake, so that whole world may know the knowledge of the Lord will cover the earth like the water covers the ocean. The many of you remember, we have all kinds of technology. We don't need kind of the physical gathering. Now we need Bible sharing by virtual correspondence. Some cases, we have all kinds of internet and other systems that the gospel of the Lord can saturating into every single individual in the corner of the world. Brethren, so in the Bible, we have the gap here because the Bible tells us 69 weeks fulfilled. The first one, restoration of the Jerusalem city wall. And the second one, coming of the Messiah. So 69 weeks fulfilled, according to the book of Daniel chapter 9. And then now, the time of Gentile, the time of church. This is so-called the church age, or the time of Gentiles. And then this time will be ended soon when you see the fig tree. When fig tree, if you see the branches burning, and burning much more like the leaves, please know that my time of coming is near to you. The restoration of Israel is very critical to us. 6 days war, and so-called the Middle East war, Jerusalem war, 4 times war, are all written in the Bible. We can interpret very critically, literally, and also spiritually. At the same time, the critical role player is not actually Jewish people, but they actually play the key leaders in this country to make that happen. That's why in the 20th century is the century of the United States of America. And there is a reason from now, every history you see, the 20th century phenomena, must be looking at all biblical timeline by spiritual eyes. So in this time, what happened? The church will be raptured in the air. 7-year tribulation will happen in the earth. And then the saints and with Christ will coming into the earth. And the judgment will be finished. And the millennial kingdom will start. And a new Jerusalem, we may enter into that. So in this eternity, the many remember the church age tribulation period. We're coming to very near to this tribulation time, brethren. And Cok and Makok, what the prophet Ezekiel mentions in 38 and 39. And also, if you remember, the prophet Daniel says the Antichrist will overreign in our world right before what? In the name of the world governments. What is that? One world government, one world economy with harlot system. What is the harlot system? Religious harlot. What is that? Roman Catholicism with one religion, which include the liberal theology, liberal church, Shintoism, Buddhism, Islam, and Hinduism, animists, and all kinds of different religious people putting together. So in this sense, the book of Daniel and book of Revelation and book of Ezekiel must be combined together in our day, 2020, brethren. Why? We are very near to the coming of the Lord. We are very near to the sign and wonders that God really fulfilled his prophecies in our own eyes. Brethren, so you have to see the poor horses, red, pale, and the dark. In these poor horses are riding and writing, and then, coming into the era of the judgment. It's near. But I said there must be a precursor of things. And the other one, in the book of Revelation, chapter 11, particularly chapter 10 and 11. And it talks about the beast, and the second beast, and the resurrection of beast. And that the beast will receive the power of Satan and govern the world, and then also persecuting the people of Israel. So in this sense, the mark of beast will powerful, because no one can buy and sell, no one can live without the mark of beast on your forehead or arm. And after what happened, the seven seal, 7 trumpet, 7 seal, and 7 bowls. So 777. And after what happened, Christ with saints coming down and destroy the power of Satan, putting it into the abyss, the eternal power. And then what happened? It said the millennial kingdom, 1,000 years kingdom. Then will be also standing in the white throne and coming into New Jerusalem. That is eternal life for everyone who believes in Christ as Savior and the Lord. So in this beautiful picture from the Bible, brethren, 2020, in this time, in the coronavirus, where the epidemic really affecting our life, is giving us the window of this revelation, seeing the world from the Bible. United States. Is there any place for the United States in the Bible? So a lot of us say that no, but we can interpret, because the book of Daniel says that 10 horns and the 7s, and then the 3 out of the 1. So it's like United States of America is a daughter of Europe. Because we have Anglos, we have Italian, we have Irish, we have Russians, and we have Germans, and we have the different part of the European ancestors in this land. And later on, the other nationality coming in this land. However, main part of that, more than 80% of the population in the United States are so-called white Caucasian. So does Bible mention the United States into the four beasts, what the prophet Daniel says? The prophet Daniel chapter 2, verse 1 to 39. And as you know, like a lion look and a bear look, and then the rough part, and then later on the beast, and then 10 toe, united. So America means United States. When this country became independent, 13 colonial states united by the declaration of the Benjamin Franklin and George Washington and the forefathers. So they declared that this country was united. So it could be united. Otherwise, does it mention to United Nations? Because 193 nations belong to these organizations. So either way, the United States of America or United Nations, we don't know. But the word of the storm from high, and then just striking the toe and destroy the power of Satan. But biblical prophecy clearly mentioned that there will be one world governments before the coming of the Antichrist kingdom. So this is very clear. So before that, what happened? It must be system set up before the coming of the one world. What kind of system? Economic system, financial system, educational system, the military system, and even the urban systems, and the medical system, and also the banking system, and more so the border system. When we see all of these, it's already done. This belongs to UN agenda. Many nations agree. We have already this system. What is that? WTO, WHO, the World Trade Organization, World Health Organization. We have NATO. We have United Nations. Underneath of United Nations, we have all kind of subdirectory of the national alliances. United States of America is standing in the last stage. But I'm not sure the United States will play as a place of the resurrected Rome. Traditionally, in theology, we interpret the resurrected Roman Empire will be the European nations. That's why the first one always thinking the EU will play a role, the place of the Antichrist government. Another one, EU and United States will combine. So no one knows. And the third one, as I said, the United Nations may play. But let's examining all those things into the eyes of the Bible. So this is Louis Thomas, the McFadden. He is the first one exposed the secrecy of the Federal Reserve when he investigated as a congressman, the Republican congressman from the Pennsylvania. He was a part of the team in the committee and investigating long time about the financial system, how the secret society actually worked more than 150 years in this land. As I said, from the beginning of the revolution and from the also time of the Andrew Jackson, the President Andrew Jackson's, the first central bank, and from the time of the Abraham Lincoln's central bank, and then even time so after the Civil War, so they continually sending their sire children, and also they continually send their secret men like Schiff's, and then Washburg's, and they sent the Piermont Morgan, and they sent all kinds of mindset people into America. And then not only sending the secret men, also they sent amazing number of the Ashkenazim Jews from Bulgaria and from Ukraine, from Balkan, from Russia, from the Belarus, so that all these parts actually migrate into United States of America before the Second World War. So they had long enough the connection in this land to do the financing and also the company entrepreneurship, and in case of the trading, and also the states and politics, and more so the education. That's why if you see 1 in 3 Harvard students are Jewish. Still today, 1 in 3 Harvard students are Jewish. If you know the half the number of the American Nobel Prize awardees are Jewish. And if you remember, the top 100 tycoon in this country, is a majority of them are Jewish. No single people who do not have Jewish bloodline. And also, if you remember, the all kind of fortunes they have, not only in this land, but around the world. Jewish clan, the Jewish family. So we have to know today what they did it. But when Congressman McFadden investigated, he found the clue, an amazing thing. And then he said that the Federal Reserve is one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever seen. Federal Reserve is the most corrupted institution in the world. There is not a man with the sounds of my voice who does not know that this nation is run by international bankers. Who are the international bankers? They hide their names because it's a several generations past. Therefore, their name didn't appear like in the name of Rothschild, but in the name of Coeb and Loeb. So you don't know the name because their name was changed. Lehman Brothers. Their name was changed. Actually, U.S. corporation. So no one knows. There is no name anymore. U.S. corporation, what is that? Modern day, the Bank of America. All the names you never known before. In European field, you know the name, but here in America, you don't know the name. But they control all of our American sectors by creating the central bank, the Federal Reserve. This congressman says so. And then this another quotation. When the Federal Reserve Act was passed, the people of this United States did not perceive that a world banking system was being set up here. Why? In the middle of the 1913, in the Christmas Eve, in the middle of the Christmas Eve, this Federal Reserve Act was passed. That's why people don't know. They are enjoying the Christmas party. So he said that when the Federal Reserve Act was passed, the people of this United States did not perceive that a world banking system was being set up here. Super state control by international bankers. He said that not American bankers. He said that international bankers, mostly in his diet, he said foreign bankers. Actually, foreign bankers controlling American money. So international bankers and international industrialists acting together to enslave the world for their own pleasure. For their own pleasure, not for the sake of the United States, not the sake of the whole world prosperity, not the sake of any single individuals of the entertainments, but rather their own pleasure. Every effort has been made by the Federal Reserve to conceal. They try to hide, and they are not able to show anything. They try to conceal its powers, but the truth is, the Federal Reserve has usurped the government. The federal government, the Federal Reserve is usurped. What do you mean? They received interest from the American government. Another one, they receive interest from every single penny you exchange. Every single dollar you use, you pay the interest to the Federal Reserve. They receive that interest. And they returning to the Treasury of America, but some portion they receive privately. This is what the law was passed in the middle of the night, the Christmas Eve in 1913. Therefore, this unthinkable, never think about this, happen in our world. Brethren, New York City, this is the actually very important, the government official letter, December 17, 1913. I'm going to tell you the name, but this is a very important one. My dear Senator Wicks, because this is an investigation, just few days before this enactment was actually implemented by both houses, the Congress and Senate. My dear Senator Wicks, throughout my public life, I have supported all measures designed to take the governments out of the banking business. This bill brought the government into the banking business as never before in our history. The powers vested in the Federal Reserve Board seem to me highly dangerous, especially where there is political control over the board. Political control over the board. And I should be sorry to hold stock in a bank subject to such denominations. Because the bill as it stands seems to me to open the way to vast inflation of currency. All-seeing eyes, Freemason design, and all kind of pyramid design, all of the Illuminati skills incepting in the $1 bill from now, this time. And actually what it is saying that, here, this bill as it stands seems to me to open the way to vast inflation of the currency. Because American citizens will pay the interest every single penny you use, and then the Federal Reserve will receive that. And you know what happened? It created constant inflation, and every citizen in America will become slave. This is called enslavement system. You'll be a debtor. I had hoped to support this bill because as senator, but I cannot vote for it, because it seems to me to contain features and to rest upon the principle in the highest degree, menacing to our prosperity, to stability in business, to general welfare of the people of the United States of America. When I read this one, official letter, I cried and wept. This is a very tragic letter. This is actually officially reported. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, Republican senator, who has sincere Christian mindset, but the majority of the senator, congressmen, supported and funded by these international bankers. They cannot stop it. all of the powers, professors, politicians, economists, tycoons, business leaders, all belong to this secret society. The government cannot handle it. They trapped into it. So one of these beautiful ones, I think before I mentioned him once again, this congressman, the congressman from the Pennsylvania, Louis Thomas McFadden. This is the official report in the name of the Congress Investigation Committee, so-called Federal Reserve Corporation. So it was actually done, and then it was officially actually produced in 1934. But he was heavily attacked by the secret society. He dropped off. And that's why, but anyway, the investigation going on. So I want to quote from his very important one. This is what he says, so-called an astounding exposure. This is not the ordinary. This is an astounding exposure. He disclosed, very important, the secrecy of the Federal Reserve. He said that, when I read that, it's like you can just download from the website, Federal Reserve, and then you typewrite his name, you can get that, on your computer. It's a long, I just get the title because I cannot give you all, but this is what he reserved in the House of Congress. Federal Reserve is a corrupt institution. He said that. This is a corrupt institution. Number two, it will create Great Depression. So in 1929, because of the Federal Reserve. And what happened? The richer get richer, the poor get poorer, while Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, and Carnegie, and all of the conglomerates get richer. The poor lost their houses and their businesses and their small companies. This is what happening in the very lands in America in 1929. Why? Because of Federal Reserve System. What the secret society created before. And the schemes of the Federal Reserve are actually revealed. He said that. There are details of it. And also, I want to quote it because I don't want to miss this important one. The Federal Reserve became law the day before Christmas Eve in the year of 1913. Shortly afterwards, German international bankers. What is German international bankers? Kuhn and Loeb. The Kuhn and Loeb two companies merged. We call Kuhn and Loeb. Kuhn and Loeb, who are they? Actually, I told you Rothschild sire children. And they trained them up. In a very young age, they sent it to America soil. And what happened? In the very land, they fluent in English, though they came from Germany. And they set up the central bank. And then that bank is so-called Kuhn and Loeb Company of New York. This company later on became Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers created the crisis in New York in 2008. And then it became the part of the Merrill Lynch. The Merrill Lynch combined together. The U.S. corporation. What is that? Bank of America. So, here, the German International Bank, Kuhn Loeb and Company, sent one of their partners here to run it. And in this report, thieves go scot-free. Why? This Scot means the Bank of Scotland. The Bank of Scotland was controlled by Rothschild. They used the Bank of Scotland, Nova Scotia, and others. So it says that thieves go scot-free because the bankers, international financiers, coming into America, and they can just freely steal all of the money and fortunes here in this land by legal procedures. This is legal procedures. Thieves become legitimized. World enslavement plan is actually giving this opportunity by banking system that every citizen, when you buy a house, whatever you want to do, you became slaves. And Roosevelt, and not also the Woodrow Wilson, because they have the Jewish line, and international bankers collaborated very closely. And the enemy of the people, they rob. This is what they use also. Sometimes, if you have the enemy and they divide it, and the enemy become my friend, and they all together the enemy, they rob the money from the nations and the people. And the conspiracy war debts, World War I, the all kind of wars, even Iraqi invasions, Afghanistan war, Bosnian war, Sudanese. Oh, I cannot name them all. So the Federal Reserve pays no taxes. We pay taxes, they no pay taxes. Rather, they receive money from us. So this is a system they created in the year 1913. So if you see that on top of that, it's like there is like a puppeteer, the puppet people, because they are not genuine. But one who control is actually 4 major banking company, and behind of that also the international bankers, and then of that the major player in it is the Morgan, J.P. Morgan family. So the Benjamin Guggenheim, Isaac Straus, Jacob Astor, they opposed New Federal Reserve Bank. But likewise, on the right hand, the Titanic ship, all 3 of these men were aboard in the Congress. And then they disagree, but the Congress, House of Congress, House of Senate, House of Supreme Court, House of Banks, sinking together. What do you mean by that? American nation is sinking. American nation is started to sinking into the ocean. Who made this? The evil schemes. I would say some of the secret societies. So John D. Rockefeller says that competition is sin. This competition is sin. Who says so? Rothschild. Because if an enemy out there, you make enemy your friends. And enemy together, what? You divide the nations and others, and then conquer it. So the Titanic didn't sail in unlucky year for icebergs. But the public bank option, safer, they say, if you put your money in the bank, it's safer. And if you're a private bank, will controlled by the central bank, it's more so. So they say safer, local, and half the cost. But however, the price will be depreciated. Inflation started. So the 4 horsemen of banking control over the American financial system. The Wall Street follow the money. And what are the 4? If you see on top of this, actually all-seeing eyes, they see they worship Lucifer. On the beneath of the pyramid, this is all of the ants, the masses. They call the people, planets, and the all living things. They think that they are useless either. And then underneath, all useless eaters do not know what thing happening on top of that. Brethren, they created the Bank of the International Settlements. The Bank of International Settlements actually supported by first Federal Reserve in America, along with other banking corporations, Deutsche Bank, Bank of England, and others. Then what happened? All central banks around the nations. And the central bank in each nation control other commercial, industrial, private banks. And the private bank lend money, loan money, give debts, and then company actually operating. The many companies operating the businesses from the investment of the banks. They don't have their money. Whether you say the Walmart, Facebook, Google, you have banking loan. Remember, there is no one who owns 100% in his own money. but they use the bank money. This system they created is very evil. The system they created is very unbiblical. The Bible says don't get the rest from your kinsmen or fellow countrymen. Because remember, you were slaves in the land of Egypt. You came out of the lands of Egypt. You're free men, don't give the interest. But we are living in unbiblical system. So 4 horsemen can say the Bank of America, JP Morgan, Chase Manhattan, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo. So the 4 banks are very major horsemen in this country's system. For horsemen of oil, the ExxonMobil, Royal Dutch Shell, BP, and Chevron Texaco, all this belongs to Rockefeller family. Rockefeller family funded by JP Morgan. JP Morgan was sent by Rothschild. Rothschild money controlled FRB. Do you know the system? So 4 horsemen in banking in Europe, Deutsche Bank, BNP, Barclays, European oil money behemoths. 4 major, also controlled by only one family, Rothschild. U.S. Trust Corporation is the beginning of formation of Federal Reserve System. Why U.S. Trust Corporation began as a bank in 1850. So nowadays we call Bank of America, but later at its inception they were called the U.S. Trust Corporation. This corporate director and honorary trustee was Walter Rothschild. Walter Rothschild was actually controlling from the beginning of the Bank of America, but it was called U.S. Trust Corporation. Other directors, Daniel Davison of the JP Morgan. This is the right man of the Rothschild. Do you remember? Richard Tucker of ExxonMobil. Mother side Rockefeller is the family intermarriage of the Rothschild that I explained to you last week. And Daniel Roberts of the Citigroup. This is another side of the clan of Rothschild family. And Marshall Schwartz of the Morgan Stanley. This is another side of the Ghetto family of the Jewish bloodline. So all these connected, none of them pure American. JP Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, Jacob Schiff. Jacob Schiff was the one very strong agent sent by Nathan Mayer Rothschild, one who controlled the Bank of England and all those, the English Channel, Suez Canal, and East India Company, all those things. Even the nation birth of Brazil and Argentina. He controls many countries around the world. And then Max Warsburg. The Warsburg family living in Frankfurt, Bavarian Principality, next to Schiff, next to Rothschild family. They were living together long before. And this family was sent by Rothschild. And they become major player in this land. His son is Paul Warsburg. And Warsburg in German was Mischbruck. Mischbruck. My pronunciation is not good, so please don't follow my accent and pronunciation. So the formation of the Federal Reserve Bank, in 1903, the Bankers Trust, the U.S. Bankers Trust, was set up by the 8 families. These 8 families still are controlling all of the entrepreneurship of America. Benjamin Strong of Bankers Trust, this is the, Benjamin Strong is the actually right man, thank you, right man of the Rothschild. So Benjamin Strong of the Bankers Trust, this is the beginning of the FRB, was the first governor, but later on the name changed the president of New York. So we call Federal Reserve Bank of New York. It's actually beginning of Federal Reserve System. That name was actually Bankers Trust. Bankers Trust called Bankers of Bankers. Because top of bankers, king of bankers, they call it Banker of Bankers. This is later on name changed, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Federal Reserve Bank of New York is in top branch, but there are 11 others, overall 12 branches all over the United States. So when Federal Reserve Bank of New York has initiative power, and then this chairman can handle all of private banking, industrial banking, commercial banking, and then 11 branches has to also give report to the bank of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. This system was begun by actually the Bankers Trust. 1911, this U.S. corporation, the Bankers Trust, are starting to finance their own expansion out of profits instead of taking out huge loans. In the first 10 years of the century, 70% of corporate funding came from profits. So, in 1913, this is a critical year. The day before the Christmas Eve, they were actually officially begin because enactment was passed. We call Federal Reserve Act was passed. So the 1913, the creation of the Federal Reserve diffused the power of the 8 families to the military and diplomatic might of the United States government. They support and fund the war. Why? Because they can control military. They can control over the government. This is actually the report by Wallis the Oberholzer. The Wallis Oberholzer is very important as people. He is the Republican statesman and senator, Republican senator from the Illinois, very faithful Christian. He gives this very careful report from the investigation of birth of FRB. So I'm not going to give my idea, but he said here in his report, the present Federal Reserve System is a flagrant case of the United States government conferring a special privilege upon bankers, not a privilege upon the government, not privilege upon the citizens, but the bankers. The U.S. government hands to the banks its credit at its virtually no cost to the banks, to be loaned out of the bankers for their own private profit, not public profit, but private. Our present money system is a debt money system. Before a dollar can circulate, a debt must be purchased. Why? Because when you produce a dollar denomination, it is a debt. It is a debt. The debt we're using. Because a debt must be purchased. Debt must be produced. And such a system assumes that you can borrow yourself out of debts. You have US dollar in your money, but that's a debt. That created system in Europe. Now eventually, in the turn of the 20th century, they succeed the system, what they have done in European nations. And then now, the system implemented other countries. The first cases was in Japan. Japan followed, and they did it. Korea did it in 1989 by International Monetary Fund reformation. And now Korea belongs to the guideline of the IMF. So the 50% investment is not Korean money. That's from George Soros, hedge fund, and stealing money people. Remember, you must be awakened. Federal Reserve System is not owned by anyone. But very important one, the Federal Reserve System is awkward word. It is not federal because this is private. There is no reserve. There is no gold reserve. There is no silver reserve. There is no bond reserve. They just simply produce money. It is not bank, but they say Federal Reserve Bank, 12 bank in 12 locations. All fake. It is not federal, it is not reserve, it is not a bank. But they use the name Federal Reserve Bank or Federal Reserve Board, Federal Reserve System. The Federal Reserve System was created in 1913, as I said, by Federal Reserve Act to serve as nation's central bank. In the time of the Jacksonian era, Andrew Jackson, it failed when they actually renewed the 20 years of the use. In the time of Abraham Lincoln, it was also failed. Now they succeed in the time of Jewish man, Woodrow Wilson, in his maternal side. The Board of Governors in Washington, D.C. is an agency of the federal government. And the headquarters of the Federal Reserve is the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And they have to report to the Congress, House of Congress. It's from the branch in Washington, D.C. So that's why only not the federal government. President Trump doesn't have power. That's why he always plays the role before the screen. But he cannot command. He cannot give his order. Only the Congress can audit and receive report. So it's only the Congress is accountable to the actions. So the Federal Reserve Banking System was created. The Central Governing Board, the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, later the directors, and decentralized operating structure of 12 branches. We call Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Federal Reserve Bank of Ohio, Federal Reserve Bank of Washington, D.C., Federal Reserve Bank of such and so forth. A blend of public-private characteristics. Actually, it is not the public, it is not private, but seemingly it is not totally governmental. Nelson Wilmot Aldrich. He actually gives a very important one. He is a Republican coming from Rhode Island. He is a senator, but he investigated the Federal Reserve. So he said here, before passage of this act in 1913, the New York bankers could only dominate the Reserve of New York. When this act was passed, now we are able to dominate the bank reserve of entire nations. So likewise, what Rothschild controlled the Hesse-Kassel in the Holy Roman Empire, when they became the safer or security guard of the finance of the crown, and they were able to have huge money. By that money, they disseminated and multiplied it, and then he sent his son, Nathan, to London, James to Paris, and then Jacob to Naples, Sicily, and the last one to the Vienna, Austria. And then he knows how to manipulate and also control. When you control the Bank of England, and you are able to control over so-called the South African war, we call Boer Wars, because they support money for the British Army. And then this war began. When the Bank of England support the actually in formation of a company which is called East India Company. They control over Shanghai. They control over entire nation of subcontinent of India, nowadays Bangladesh, and Pakistan and India. But actually, underneath of this money power, they were able to control 1/4 of whole planet Earth. Do you know this system? They did it here in this land. So if you know this screen, U.S. Central Bank is called the Federal Reserve System. And three key entities here. the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, 12 branches. And 12 branches working in different regions. And then they created the Open Market Committee, which is called Federal Open Market Committee. I'm going to explain to you later on. And then underneath of that, 5 key functions. The first one is the conducting nation's monetary policy. They increase exchange rate. They increase money in interest. They increase lending interest. And then what happened? When President Abraham Lincoln wanted to have money from Rothschild, they charged him and his government 30% of interest. He declined it. That's why Alexander II of Russian Empire supported the President Abraham Lincoln. Do you remember? They know how to control over the governments and leaders and others by interest rates and helping maintain the stability of the financial system. I say to you, it's not about the sake of people. It's about the private profit and the supervising and regulating financial institutions like private banks, commercial banks, industrial banks, fostering payments and settlement system safety and efficiency, and promoting consumer protections and community development. So Federal Reserve banking system has the so-called pyramid system. Underneath non-bank public and the commercial bank, Federal Reserve Bank, and then over there, 12-man board of governor and chairman who comes out of the bank in New York, control. And then on the left hand, they were able to use the Federal Open Market Committee. On the other hand, Advisory Council. All those members are Jewish. I'm going to tell you later, still today, like Greenspan. Whenever the chairman of the FRB, all Jewish. So there is no any supervision, only one accountability to report is to the Congress, not to the president, not to the federal governments. But the Federal Open Market Committee consists of the members of the board of the governors and the revenue bank, the presidents and chair of the board is actually FDMC chairs, mostly Rockefeller and JP Morgan, and some cases mostly also Rothschild, like the Coep Lopes, and some cases Wasbergs and elsewise. And the Federal Reserve banks are operating by 12 branches. Federal Open Market Committee. I'm going to give you a little explanation here. The Congress set the goal for the monetary policy. Decisions of the board and the Federal Reserve Monetary Policy setting body, the Federal Open Market Committee, about how to reach those goals do not require approval by the president or anyone else in the executive or legislative branches of the government. They almost become independent. No one can control over them. New York Federal Reserve Bank have 4 horsemen. The first horseman is Goldman Sachs. Second horseman is Rockefeller. Third horseman is Lehman Brothers. The last one, Quinn Loeb. So if you remember Goldman Sachs, Lehman Brothers, Quinn Loeb, all Jewish line. All these are all along with Rothschild. And the Rockefeller also the mother side is Jewish. When he had Standard Oil, he wanted to carry all of the oil into New York by the railway. And he wants to reduce the cost. And then he needs huge investment. And so one of those here is JP Morgan financing him. And he became the first billionaire in the world. And that's why New York Federal Reserve Bank has 80% ownership by 8 families, but 4 major banks. And 4 in Europe, 8 families altogether. 4 in United States, 4 in Europe, 8 families, and 4 major ones, Goldman Sachs, Lehman, Rockefeller, and Kuhn and Loeb companies, which later on become, this one is Lehman Brothers combined, and Merrill Lynch and Bank of America today. So the 4 major shareholders of the Federal Reserve banking system in New York is Rothschild of Paris and London, and Wasbergs of Hamburg, largest of Paris, and Israel Moses Safes of Rome. actually supporting funding, and then they started Federal Reserve Bank in New York, and this is the beginning. Who controls the Federal Reserve banking? This is a report by J.W. McAllister. J.W. McAllister has very important one because he actually has the CPA, the Thomas Shaft. He's the lawyer. Actually, he studied in Harvard Law School, and he investigated the 10 banking, 12 branches of the FRB, and he investigated, he produced a book. In his book, he reported in very detail. Of course, if you are in study of the politics, economics, you may well aware of his name. So here, he said that the FRB controls over oil industry exports. His partner, CPA Thomas Shaft, report, 10 banks control all 12 Federal Reserve Bank branches. 10 banks control over. Why? Because if you control over New York, 11 banks subdue to its leadership. And Nathan Mayer, Rothschild of London, is the beginner. Wasbrook, Cohen-Love, Schiff, all his men came to America. Rothschild Bank of Berlin is also a major player. Wasbrook Bank of Hamburg was very. All they are having different name, but all the same. And Wasbrook Bank of Amsterdam, the Lehman Brothers of New York, Lloyd Brothers of Paris, Quinn and Loeb Company, which is called Quinn and Loeb Bank of New York. This is later on Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Israel Mortgage Safe Bank of Italy, Goldman Sachs of New York, J. Piermont Morgan Chase Bank of New York. These are all controlled by one family, Rothschild. Key shareholder of the Federal Reserve Bank, the list from the Thomas Shaft, this the CPA, he report, William Rockefeller, the major four horsemen, number one, Paul Wasbrook, and right man of the Rothschild from Germany, James Stillman. I'm going to tell you that James Stillman also very important, Citigroup, the major player, intermarried with Rockefeller clan. That's Rockefeller and J. Stillman working together, and this family also all Jewish line. Jacob Schiff, who sent by Nathan Mayer Rothschild in London in order to start the central bank in America. And he created the bank, the Quinn and Love. So this is the very important one, Eustace Merlin. This is one of the very conventional and authentic book long ago. The name by The Secret of the Federal Reserve. This is the one still you can buy. Otherwise, you can just download. So he said that Rothschild is the greatest player. And then his agent, Wasbrook. And then another agent, Rockefeller. And then others. The Rockefeller became the greatest out of all those. In 1913, the year the Act of the Federal Reserve passed, number one, this Federal Reserve Bank was born. Number two, same year, J.P. Piermont, the Morgan, who actually created the banking system of America, making the Andrew Carnegie of the U.S. Steels, Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, and all the tycoon at the time, funded by J.P. Morgan, right man of the Rothschild. He died. His son, Paul Morgan, succeeded after his father. Then the Rockefeller Foundation was formed. Now, almost 107 years, United States of America under the power of the Rockefeller Foundation. Rockefeller, hospital, elderly, care center, and the museum, laboratory, research institutes, educational institutes, and all kinds of the philanthropic societies and the humanitarian funds funded by Rockefeller. You cannot avoid it. Everywhere you can see UN building, in all those by the Rockefeller family. So the House of Morgan is actually funding it. The Rockefeller family was actually out of this funding coming. So that's why behind the Rockefeller, you have to see J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan is actually very important. Why? Number one, because he acted as quasi U.S. central bank since 1838. Why? Because he continued to create central bank, what Rothschild made the central bank in Europe. Then, one of the things is that the founder of the House of Morgan is actually so-called Peabody. The Peabody is working together with the Nathan Rothschild in London. The Peabody was the one actually intermarried, one of the tycoon in British society. His name is George Peabody. That's why Nathan Rothschild has close relationship, and this became what? The George Peabody became the associate of the Rothschild. And out of that, actually Morgan was sent as agent to United States. And then he acted the central bank formation in United States. And then that's why this is not my word. This is according to book, the author Gabriel Corker stated, Morgan's activities in 1895 to 1896 in selling of U.S. gold bonds in Europe were based on the alliance with the House of Rothschild. J.P. Morgan, Chase Manhattan is actually direct line of the Rothschild. So this is called the Puzo Committee of the 1912. Do you remember in the beginning of my lecture, the U.S. Corporation? U.S. Corporation was formed, and then, the Congress commanded to investigate the transactions and trades of the U.S. Corporation. And then the committee was called Puzo Committee because one of the congressmen was Puzo. So Puzo Committee was formed, and then, they investigated the system. So, this subcommittee was called the Special Committee, or another one, Special Subcommittee of Banking and Currency Investigating. And they called Money Trust. And then what happened? They want to try to have wrongful and the evil scheme of the banking system, but all of them were supported and lobbied by Jewish money. All of them agree with the Rothschild. And then they supported the Jewish money. They supported the scheme. And what happened? And that's why year after, when they report to the Congress, and the Act of Federal Reserve was passed the day before the eve of Christmas in 1913. So this is a very tragic thing, brethren. So a year before this enactment was passed, the Puzo hearing was stating like this: Mrs. Edward Harriman selling substantial shares in New York's the Guarantee Trust Bank to J.P. Morgan, creating Morgan Guarantee Trust. It's a merge, M&A. Then the Judge Louis Brandeis, now the founder, not the founder, the name after the High Supreme Justice. He was the longest, one of the longest Supreme Court. And ever since, first Jewish Supreme Court Justice. Harvard graduate from Illinois. But Judge Louis Brandeis convinced the President Woodrow Wilson to call for an end to the interlocking board of directorates. So what I mean is we need to Federal Reserve banking system. Jurisdictions, administrations, registrations, all together working to pass Federal Reserve Bank Act. The Puzo Money Trust Committee also report the group of financial leaders had abused. They say that public trust to consolidate control over many industries. First time then they say that, they admit. But panic of 1907 started with the closing of the Knickerbocker. I'm not going to explain Knickerbocker, but this is very famous, intended, created, actually man-made creation of depression in order to have all fortunes out of the pocket of the industries. So we call the Knickerbocker Trust. And when its clearing bank and the National Bank of Commerce refused to act as the clearing agent anymore. And SS investigators found that the 180 individuals in 341 dictatorship positions in 112 corporations with 22 billion 245 million in aggregate resource of the capitalization. I cannot count it. So this is huge amount of money. And so the Federal Reserve Act was passed because of this, wrongful default, and then we call Clarion Antitrust Act was passed. According to this, actually, Rockefeller family, actually break into several smaller ones. But the later one, it is a chance to also rule over American industry again. The bank tycoons here, the J.P. Morgan, and the George Bakers and James Stillman. Actually, they are the one created this financial corporation. And then all of these 7 banks and trust bank company working together to create the Federal Reserve, the Bank Trust and Guarantee Trust, Asset Trust, National Bank of Commerce, Liberty National Bank, Chase National Bank, that's Chase Manhattan when they combine, and Farmers Loans and Trust Control, all estimated $2.1 billion. So they are all 8. So this report reveals a handful of men who hold the manipulative control of New York Stock Exchange. So the Puzo report singles out of the individuals, bankers, including Paul Washburn, Jacob the Hirsch, Schiff, this Schiff family, and Felix Washburn, and the Frank Peabody, as I told you, the Nathan Rothschild agent family, William Rockefeller, and Benjamin Strong. All Jewish family. They are longing. But the Rockefeller family only half from the John D. Rockefeller. So Big Four are here. So I'm going to speed up J.P. Morgan, Paul Washburn, and Bernard Manus Baruch. This is actually Baruch is the advisor of the President Woodrow Wilson, and who created the nation of Israel, and also the robbing into Russia, and then the one who created the Palestinian territory. And Edward Mandel House, House also very important, advanced new plan called Paul Washburn, the son of his father, so called the Federal Reserve System. They are the major players. So they say without Paul Warburg, there would have been no Federal Reserve Act. The banking house of Warburg, and Warburg in Hamburg has placed been strictly the famous business of the Rothschild. So none but Warburg has been eligible for it, but all have been born into it. So in 1895, Paul Warburg, married daughter of the late Solomon Loeb of Kuhn, Loeb and Company. That's why it's merging, amalgamations. And then, the Paul Warburg became the member of the Kuhn and Loeb Company. Later on, it became U.S. Corporation. U.S. Corporation later on, today, is what? Bank of America. So, I want to speed up. Warburg. Paul Warburg is a man who got the Federal Reserve Act together after the Aldrich Plan. And he is the mastermind of the Rothschild of the Nathan. And then he is brushing aside the external differences. In fact, the shells, we find the kernels of the two systems very closely related to one another. That's Paul Warburg. So Federal Reserve Act. Oh my goodness, I just want to speed up to finish today, and then you guys, thank you so much. Continually holding on this, watching this video, and simultaneously this is live stream. And I hope that you can give your questions if you have any other further questions. But I want to speed up to this, and I'm not going to read this one because the Charles Lindbergh's and all others. I want to skip it. In 1914, the Clayton Antitrust Act was passed, and then the World War was actually supported by FRB. So that's because of the hero shift. And then I wanted to skip it according to book, the Eustace Mullins. He said here, European nations were already bankrupt because they had maintained large standing armies for almost 50 years, First World War and others, a situation made by their own central bank, and therefore they could not finance a war. Central bank always imposes a tremendous burden on the nations for rearmaments, meaning they have to prepare arms and weapons and all accessories and defense in order to create inextinguishable debts. Debts will be created more, and simultaneously creating the military dictatorship, enslaving the people to pay the interest on the debts which the bankers have artificially created. I want to skip the World War. U.S. go to war, so I want to skip probably next week. I have to do it because this is too much for you. So I want to skip also Baruch, Gary Allen, probably next week. I'm going to do that. And this is the London Financial Times, 1921. Half a dozen men at the top of the big five banks could upset the whole fabric of the government's finance by refraining from renewing treasury bills when the president expressed. So Franklin himself knows that this is the real problem in American society. So I want to give a little further explanation today. I wanted to do, but this one is harder for you. Book of Daniel, chapter 4, 41, 43. Just as you saw, the feet and toe were partly baked clay and partly baked of iron. So this will be a divided kingdom. It will have some of the strengths of iron in it, and even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As a toe of partly iron, partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong, partly weak or brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with the baked clay, so people will be mixture, will not remain united, any more than iron mixed with clay. Daniel 4, verses 44 to 45 said, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom, will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kings and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the beginning of the vision of the rock, the cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands. A rock of salvation. It means the Christ himself that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, the gold to pieces. Today, wherever one world government, which will be united of the many nations, when it comes along to the one world economy, that the powerful men who are able to control the Bank of the International Settlements and underneath IMF and World Bank and all central bank of the nations. You see, this is really working into one system now. The Bible says this will be destroyed when Christ will come. Brethren, we should know our interest is not about how much we gain money more, but our interest is how to win soul for Christ before this happens. So next week, I'm going to continue to do the Rockefeller family, J.P. Morgan's, the lineage in this society, UN agenda, and also the IMF and BIS and World Bank. And there are so much things we have to look at in the eyes of the Bible. May God bless you all. And I pray that the many of you will be able to distinguish the things of the Lord. Thank you bearing this time together with us to understand the schemes of the satanic power behind the scenes.